How did a tiny island on the edge of the map end up with a monument older than the pyramids, 1,000 years of invasion after invasion, and a border it is still arguing about today? This is Ireland, and its story is one of the strangest in Europe, a place that kept swallowing the armies sent to conquer it, until one day it couldn't anymore. A place that was broken in two and has never quite been put back together. So let's go back, all the way back, long before there was an England to fear or a Dublin to fight over, back to a people who watched the sun. Around 3,200 years before the birth of Christ, on a bend in the River Boyne, people who left us no written words built something extraordinary. A vast mound of stone and earth we call Newgrange. Stop and think about when that was. Newgrange is older than Stonehenge. It is around 500 years older than the Great Pyramid of Giza. When the pharaohs laid their first block, this was already ancient. And it was no simple tomb. For a few mornings around the winter solstice, and only then, the rising sun sends a narrow beam down a stone passage until it lights the chamber deep inside, for about 17 minutes, then leaves it dark for another year. 5,000 years ago, someone on this island understood the sky well enough to build a machine of stone to catch it. The people who came after are the ones we think of as the first Irish. Gaelic tribes spread across the island in dozens of little kingdoms called tuatha, each with its own king, and above them all sat a high king whose ancient seat was here, on the hill of Tara, in the old royal kingdom of Meath. It is why, to this day, Meath is still called the royal county. For centuries one dynasty ruled that throne above all others, the O'Neill, the family whose descendants you would know as the O'Neills. They had no cities, they had no coins. But they had a sophisticated law of their own, the Brehon law, and a language still spoken on this island today. And here is the part that shaped everything. When Rome conquered its way across Europe, and even across the sea into Britain, it looked at Ireland, and it stopped. The legions never came. Ireland was one of the only lands in Western Europe that Rome never took. No Roman roads, no Roman towns, no Latin. While Britain was remade in Rome's image, Ireland was left to become, purely and completely, itself. The thing that finally changed Ireland did not arrive with an army. It arrived with one man and a new idea. In the 5th century, a teenager from Roman Britain was kidnapped by Irish raiders and sold into slavery here. He escaped, went home, and then did something no one expected. He came back. His name was Patrick. And he spent the rest of his life spreading Christianity across the island. Within a couple of centuries, Ireland did something remarkable. This far-flung island that Rome never bothered to conquer became one of the brightest lights in the Christian world. While much of Europe slid into the chaos that followed the fall of Rome, Irish monasteries filled with scholars. Monks here copied and preserved the learning of the ancient world by hand and produced masterpieces like the Book of Kells, a gospel so intricate that people still queue to see it. And they did not keep it to themselves. Irish monks sailed back out into a darkened Europe, founding monasteries and schools from Scotland to Italy, teaching a continent that had half forgotten how to read. For a while, this tiny island on the edge of everything was quietly helping to keep civilization alive. They called it the Island of Saints and Scholars. But a rich island, full of treasure, with no real army to speak of, was about to look very tempting to the most feared sailors in Europe. In the year 795, the Vikings came. At first, it was exactly what you would imagine. Fast raids out of nowhere, monasteries looted and burned, treasure carried off. For 2 generations, the Norsemen were simply a terror from the sea. And then something changed. The Vikings stopped leaving. They dragged their longships ashore, built fortified harbours, and stayed. And in doing so, they gave Ireland something it had never had in all its thousands of years. Towns. Look at the map of Ireland today. Dublin, Waterford, Wexford, Cork, Limerick. Every one of those cities was founded or built up by the Vikings. Dublin, the capital of the country, began as a Norse trading port on the River Liffey. The raiders had become Ireland's first city builders. Over time, they married into the Irish, took up the Irish language and faith, and blended into a mixed people historians call the Hiberno-Norse. Ireland was doing the thing it would do again and again. It was absorbing its invaders, And out of the wars against those Vikings rose the most famous High King in Irish history, Brian Boru, a warrior from the south who fought his way up until, for one rare moment, nearly the whole island answered to him. Now you have probably heard the legend. Brian Boru, the Christian Irish hero, smashing the pagan Vikings at the Battle of Clontarf in 1014 and driving them into the sea. It is a great story. It is also mostly a later invention. The real Clontarf was messier and more human than the legend. It was closer to an Irish civil war. Brian's forces on one side, the men of Leinster and the Norse of Dublin on the other, and Vikings fighting on both sides of the field. Brian's side did win, but the old High King, too frail to fight, was cut down as the battle ended. Ireland's greatest king died on the very day of his greatest victory. And the dream of one man ruling all of Ireland died with him. For a century and a half after Brian Boru, Ireland went back to what it knew best. A patchwork of kings squabbling over a high kingship none of them could quite hold on to. By the 1100s, one family had clawed its way to the top, the O'Conors of Connaught. Their king, Rory O'Connor, was recognised as High King of Ireland. He would also turn out to be the very last, because it was one of his own feuds that opened the door to the invasion that changed everything. Rory drove a bitter rival, Dermot MacMurrough, the King of Leinster, clean out of Ireland. And Dermot, humiliated and desperate, went looking for muscle to win his kingdom back. He found it across the sea, in the Normans. These were the same iron-disciplined warlords who had conquered England 100 years before. In 1169, they landed in Ireland, and they were unlike anything the Irish kings had faced. Armoured knights, archers and castles that went up faster than an Irish army could pull them down. Their leader, a lord known as Strongbow, married Dermot's daughter and claimed Leinster for himself. And then, in 1171, the King of England, Henry II, sailed over with a huge army of his own, nervous that his Normans were building a rival kingdom on his doorstep. He forced the Irish and Norman lords to bow to him as overlord. That was the moment England first planted its flag in Ireland. It would not leave for another 7.5 centuries. But here is the twist that says everything about this island. The Normans conquered, and then Ireland conquered them. Cut off from England, surrounded by Irish neighbours, the Norman lords slowly went native. They married Irish wives, spoke Irish, followed Irish customs, until people said they had become more Irish than the Irish themselves. English rule shrank back until it barely covered a small fenced-off zone around Dublin, known simply as the Pale. Panicked English laws even tried to ban the settlers from speaking Irish or marrying the Irish. It did not work. Ireland had swallowed another invader. For a while it looked like Ireland might just absorb England too. And then the whole game changed. Because back in England, a king broke with the Pope. In the 1530s, King Henry VIII of England broke away from the Catholic Church and made himself head of a new Protestant one. England, over time, became a Protestant country. Ireland, stubbornly, did not. It stayed Catholic. And that single split, a Protestant England ruling a Catholic Ireland, became the fault line that everything for the next 400 years would crack along. Henry was no longer content to be a distant overlord. In 1541, he had himself declared King of Ireland, and England set out to do what it had never truly done before: conquer the whole island, for real this time. It was brutal, and it took decades. The last stand was in the north, in Ulster, the most Gaelic and most defiant province of all. Its great lords fought a long war against the crown and lost. And in 1607, in a moment Irish history never forgot, the beaten Earls of Ulster simply boarded a ship and sailed away to Europe, abandoning their lands forever. The flight of the Earls. The old Gaelic order, the world of high kings and Brehon law that reached all the way back past Newgrange, was finally, truly over. And it left a prize behind. Ulster, leaderless and wide open. So the crown did something that would echo for centuries. It planted it. Tens of thousands of Protestant settlers, mostly from Scotland and England, were shipped in and given the land, while the Catholic Irish were pushed off it. A new community, loyal to the crown and to the Protestant faith, was deliberately built in the north of Ireland. If you have ever wondered why the north of Ireland is different to this day, why it would one day be split off from the rest, this is where it began. not in the 20th century. Here, in 1609, with a map and a boatload of settlers. What followed were the darkest years of all. In the middle of the 1600s, after a Catholic rebellion, an English general arrived whose name is still spoken with a shiver in Ireland. Oliver Cromwell. His campaign was merciless. Towns that resisted were put to the sword, and afterwards came a land grab on a scale Ireland had never seen. Catholic landowners were stripped of their estates and driven to the poor, rocky west. The choice they were given became a grim Irish saying, to hell or to Connaught. Then came the war that set the north in stone. In 1690, two kings fought for the throne of England on Irish soil. A Catholic king, James, and the Protestant king who had replaced him, William of Orange. They met at the River Boyne, and William won. That victory is why, even now, you will see Protestant communities in Northern Ireland marching every summer under the colour orange, the colour of King William. The Siege of Derry, the Battle of the Boyne. These were not just battles, they became the founding memories of a whole community. Ireland was now two peoples on one island, and they remembered very different histories. For the Catholic majority, the years that followed were years of exclusion. A series of laws, the penal laws, stripped Catholics of the right to own land, to vote, to carry weapons, to hold office. And then, in 1801, the last thread was cut. Ireland's own parliament was abolished, and the whole island was absorbed directly into the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland. On paper, Ireland was now simply a part of Britain. In practice, most of its people had no power in it at all. A Catholic lawyer named Daniel O'Connell later won back some of those rights through peaceful mass protest, and Irish people began to organise and to hope. But hope was about to meet the worst catastrophe in the island's history. By the 1840s, Ireland was crowded and poor, and millions of its people lived on almost a single food. The potato. It grew where nothing else would, and a family could survive on it. And then, in 1845, it rotted in the ground. A disease swept the potato fields and turned the harvest to black slime year after year. What followed is remembered simply as the Great Hunger, and this is the detail that has never been forgiven. Through the worst of it, food, grain, and cattle kept being shipped out of Ireland, out of a starving country, to be sold in Britain. People died in sight of full carts and loaded ships. The numbers are staggering. Ireland's population before the famine was around 8.5 million. In the space of a few years, about 1 million people died of starvation and disease. And another million or more fled the country, packed onto ships bound for America, Britain, Australia, anywhere but here. Around 1 in 8 people in the entire country was gone. Ireland has never had that many people again, to this day. But those who sailed away built something the empire never saw coming. A vast Irish nation scattered across the world, in Boston, New York, Liverpool, Sydney, that never forgot where it came from, and never forgot how it had been treated. The famine emptied Ireland. It also lit a fire that would burn for the rest of its history. By the early 1900s, that fire had a shape. A new generation was done asking Britain politely. They revived the Irish language, Irish sport, Irish pride. And a hard core of them wanted one thing: a republic, a free and independent Ireland. On Easter Monday, 1916, a small group of rebels seized buildings in the centre of Dublin and declared an Irish republic. The rising was crushed in a week, and its leaders were shot by firing squad. But those executions turned dead rebels into martyrs and swung the country behind them. What came next was a war of independence, a guerrilla war against British forces that ground on until Britain came to the table. And in 1921, they signed a treaty. But here was the agonizing catch. Ireland could be free, but not all of it. Remember that Protestant community planted in the north 300 years earlier. They were now the majority in 6 of Ireland's 32 counties, and they wanted to stay in the United Kingdom. So the island was partitioned. 26 counties in the south became the Irish Free State, and in time a fully independent republic. 6 counties in the northeast stayed part of the United Kingdom as Northern Ireland. Ireland had won its independence, but it had been cut in 2 to get it. And the split was so bitter that the new state fell into a civil war over it. old comrades killing each other over whether a divided freedom was worth taking at all. The border was drawn, and in the north, on the wrong side of it for many, the old fault line, Protestant and Catholic, Unionist and Nationalist, was very much still alive. For decades, that border held in an uneasy quiet. But in Northern Ireland, the Catholic minority faced real discrimination in housing, in jobs, in votes, and in the late 1960s, a civil rights movement demanding equality tipped over into violence. What followed is known with grim understatement as the Troubles. For 30 years, Northern Ireland lived through a low, grinding war. On one side, mostly Catholic nationalists who wanted the North to join the Republic. On the other, mostly Protestant Unionists who wanted it to stay British. Paramilitary groups on both sides, and the British Army in the middle. Bombings, shootings, checkpoints and funerals became ordinary life. By the time it was over, more than 3,500 people had been killed, most of them civilians, on a patch of land smaller than many cities. It ended not with a winner, but with exhaustion, and with talking. On Good Friday, 1998, nearly every side signed an agreement. The violence would stop, power would be shared between the two communities, and the biggest question of all, whether the North stays British or joins a united Ireland, would be settled only one way, by a vote. If a majority in the North and a majority in the South ever both choose unity, then it happens, peacefully, and not before. So that is where Ireland stands today, a republic in the South, prosperous and independent. 6 counties in the North at peace, but still part of the United Kingdom. 1 island, 2 states, and a border that everyone has agreed only the people themselves can ever remove. 5,000 years ago, they built a temple to catch the sun on this island. They have been raided, invaded, planted, starved, and split ever since. And the last chapter is still unwritten. So here is the question we will leave you with. After everything you have just seen, do you think we will ever see a united Ireland? Wherever you are watching from, tell us below. If this was your kind of story, subscribe, and we will map how another country came to be. And the North, the Troubles, and the long road to peace, that story is big enough to deserve a video all its own. Maybe next.